How many
I
years
was
ago?
arrested. I was arrested on a train
Where?
going to Italy when we were shooting.
May we offer our congratulations. I guess this is your first major dramatic role.
Just 26 years old and 8 months pregnant when she was killed by members of Charles Manson's cult.
I think about Sharon Tate and her unborn baby.
What did I think about it?
And yeah.
It's not my world. I don't live in that world.
Well,
She was Hollywood's golden girl. Beautiful, rising fast, and just months away from becoming a mother. Sharon Tate had it all: a glittering career, a famous husband, and a future that seemed unstoppable. But in the summer of 1969, her story took a turn that shocked the entire world. Overnight, she went from the promise of stardom to the symbol of Hollywood's darkest nightmare. And more than 50 years later, the questions, the rumors, and the mysteries surrounding her life and death still haven't gone away. What really happened to Sharon Tate, and why does her story continue to haunt us? Before she became a household name, Sharon Tate was just a quiet girl trying to find her place in the world. Born in Dallas, Texas in 1943, Sharon grew up in a strict but loving military family. Her father, an Army officer, meant the family moved often, from Texas to Washington, then to Italy, and back again. This constant uprooting gave Sharon a sense of being an outsider. Friends described her as shy, almost hesitant to speak up in crowds, but her looks made her stand out wherever she went. By 16, she was already winning beauty contests, including the title of Miss Richland, and appearing in local papers as the All-American Girl. To many, she seemed destined for glamour, but underneath the tiara and perfect smile, Sharon wrestled with insecurities. She never saw herself as a natural star, often doubting if she had the talent to back up her beauty. Yet every move her family made seemed to place her closer to the center of the spotlight. When her father was stationed in Verona, Italy, Sharon found herself surrounded by the culture of art and cinema. Italian filmmakers noticed her, and soon she was getting background roles in movies shooting on location. Those moments on set lit a spark in her. Hollywood no longer felt like a distant dream. Back in the States, she decided to chase it. Sharon started with modeling jobs and commercials, slowly stepping into the entertainment world. She appeared in small TV roles, including the Beverly Hillbillies, where audiences first caught a glimpse of her charm. Even in these short appearances, people in the industry saw something magnetic about her, an aura that made her more than just another pretty face. But while she was making strides, Sharon wasn't yet fully accepted by Hollywood's elite. She was still on the outside, working hard for a chance that could vanish in an instant. Friends later recalled that Sharon had a mix of fragility and determination. She was polite, soft-spoken, and always worried about disappointing others, but when it came to her dream of acting, she refused to let go. Every rejection hurt, but she kept showing up for auditions. Rumors even suggest she considered walking away at times, telling friends she wasn't sure she could compete in such a ruthless business, but something always pulled her back. Maybe it was the recognition she started to get from casting directors, maybe it was the thrill of being on camera, or maybe it was just the idea that she was meant for more than a quiet life in the shadow of her father's career. Whatever it was, Sharon stayed. By the mid-1960s, she was building momentum. Photographers loved her natural elegance, magazines started featuring her, and producers began to see her as a potential breakout star. She had the kind of presence that audiences couldn't ignore, classic Hollywood beauty, but with a fresh, modern edge. Sharon Tate was no longer the shy military daughter bouncing between cities. She was becoming something much bigger, and Hollywood was starting to notice. What she didn't know was that her rise would be meteoric, and that her private life, her romances, and her choices would soon draw her into a whirlwind that fame alone couldn't control. By the mid-1960s, Sharon Tate's career had begun to take off, but her path into Hollywood wasn't as simple as beauty alone opening doors. She was determined to prove herself as more than just another model turned actress. Her early television appearances caught attention, but it was her role in the 1967 dark comedy Valley of the Dolls that thrust her into the spotlight. Sharon played Jennifer North, a beautiful young woman whose career and personal life spiral into tragedy. Critics were harsh on the film itself, but Sharon's performance was impossible to ignore. Audiences saw her vulnerability, her charm, and her ability to carry heavy emotion on screen. Some even said the role felt eerily close to her real personality, sweet, fragile, and destined to be misunderstood by Hollywood. The film gave her the recognition she needed, but it also placed her in a box. Studios loved to market her beauty, but Sharon wanted to be known as more than a blonde bombshell. Behind the cameras, Sharon worked hard to sharpen her skills. She trained relentlessly, not just in acting but in physical performance. She even crossed paths with martial arts legend Bruce Lee, who at the time was making a name for himself as both a teacher and a fight choreographer in Hollywood. Sharon, always eager to expand her range, studied under him, gaining confidence in movement and fight scenes. Few fans knew it then, but Sharon Tate was one of the early Hollywood actresses who embraced martial arts, and her training added a new layer to her screen presence. It showed she was serious, committed to putting in the work, not just coasting on her looks. This side of Sharon, the one pushing past her shy nature to grow stronger, gave her friends a glimpse of the star she was becoming. Still, her career had its hurdles. Sharon often lost out on major roles, not because she lacked talent, but because Hollywood still doubted her depth. Producers were quick to cast her in roles that highlighted her beauty without giving her much to say. Friends recalled her frustration during this period. She knew she could do more. Rumors suggest she privately vented about the way male co-stars and directors dismissed her, seeing her as decoration rather than a serious performer. But instead of quitting, she doubled down. Her roles in films like Eye of the Devil and The Fearless Vampire Killers further cemented her as a star to watch. In these projects, she showed range, moving from haunting, ethereal characters to playful, comedic ones. Each performance peeled back another layer of who Sharon Tate could be. And while Hollywood was just beginning to understand her potential, audiences were already enchanted. They saw a young woman who seemed both glamorous and approachable, someone who could light up the screen without even trying. Sharon Tate wasn't just an actress anymore. She was becoming a symbol of the era, a face of 1960s Hollywood with all its promise and turbulence. But success in Hollywood came hand in hand with a personal life that was quickly becoming just as dramatic as her on-screen roles. On the set of The Fearless Vampire Killers, Sharon's life would change forever. It was there she met Roman Polanski, a rising director whose artistic brilliance was matched only by his eccentric reputation. Their meeting would spark one of Hollywood's most talked-about romances, one that pulled Sharon into a whirlwind of glamour, controversy, and eventually tragedy. On the set of The Fearless Vampire Killers in 1967, Sharon Tate's life took a dramatic turn. The film itself was quirky, dark, and offbeat, but what made it unforgettable for Sharon was the director, Roman Polanski. At the time, Polanski was already earning a reputation as one of the boldest young filmmakers in the world. Fresh from the critical success of Repulsion and Knife in the Water, he was seen as a genius with a flair for unsettling but brilliant storytelling. Sharon, by contrast, was still carving out her identity in Hollywood. Their meeting seemed unlikely. An ambitious European director, with an eccentric, controlling streak, and a gentle, somewhat insecure American actress trying to prove she belonged. Yet from their first encounters on set, sparks flew. Their relationship developed quickly, and though friends of Sharon's were cautious about Polanski's reputation as a womanizer and eccentric, Sharon was drawn to his brilliance and confidence. He pushed her creatively, challenged her to think bigger, and in some ways gave her the validation she had been craving from Hollywood. To Polanski, Sharon wasn't just beautiful. She was a muse, someone who embodied the type of character he wanted to bring to life on screen. Within a year, their whirlwind romance led to marriage in London in January 1968, an event that was covered like a royal wedding in entertainment magazines. Sharon wore a simple but elegant mini dress, and the photos of the smiling couple cemented them as one of Hollywood's most glamorous new power pairs. The Polanskis quickly became fixtures of the swinging 1960s social scene. They mingled with stars like Mia Farrow, Steve McQueen, and Warren Beatty. Their circle of friends represented the very peak of Hollywood's young elite. Their lifestyle was glamorous, but it wasn't without turbulence. Polanski's personality, demanding and often dismissive of convention, sometimes clashed with Sharon's softer nature. Rumors circulated in Hollywood about Roman's infidelity, with gossip columns speculating whether Sharon was truly happy behind closed doors. Still, those who knew her said she was deeply in love with him, convinced that their connection was worth the sacrifices. She often told friends that she believed she had finally found someone who understood her. By 1969, Sharon and Roman had settled into their now famous home at 10050 Cielo Drive, nestled in the Hollywood Hills. The house became a hub of activity, late-night gatherings, film industry parties, and a constant stream of visitors. To outsiders, it looked like the dream, a rising director and a beautiful actress living out the fantasy of 1960s Hollywood, at the very center of its glitz and energy. But beneath the surface, some friends noticed cracks. Sharon was pregnant with their first child, and while she seemed radiant with the excitement of motherhood, Roman was often away on projects, leaving her to host friends alone at the house. There were whispers about Sharon feeling isolated at times, especially as Roman's career consumed him. Still, she held on to the image of a perfect life, clinging to the belief that her family's future would be brighter than anything she had ever imagined. The truth was that Sharon Tate was living on the edge of two worlds, one of incredible promise and glamour, and another filled with loneliness, rumors, and uncertainty. And just as she seemed to be balancing it all, the summer of 1969 approached, bringing with it the darkest twist imaginable. The house at 10050 Cielo Drive should have been a sanctuary. Tucked into the Hollywood Hills with sweeping views of Los Angeles, it was the kind of place people dreamed of owning. Built in the 1940s, it had once belonged to celebrities like Cary Grant and Candice Bergen. By the time Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski moved in, it had already earned a reputation as a gathering spot for Hollywood's young elite. To visitors, the house radiated warmth, white walls, lush gardens, and a sense of charm that matched Sharon's personality. Friends described it as an open home where laughter, music, and late-night conversations were constant. But beneath the glamour, a darker energy was beginning to creep in, one that Sharon herself seemed to sense. She was known for being sensitive to her surroundings, and some close to her later said she felt uneasy in the house when Roman was away. She was heavily pregnant in the summer of 1969, and while she tried to stay positive, she confided to friends about unsettling feelings, as if something wasn't quite right. Reports claim she even experienced disturbing dreams, including visions of strangers breaking in. Whether these were coincidences or chilling premonitions, Sharon's unease stood in sharp contrast to the carefree atmosphere that the house projected to outsiders. The guests who visited only added to the contradictions. Cielo Drive was a magnet for Hollywood names. Steve McQueen, Mama Cass Elliot, and other stars of the time were known to stop by. The parties were lively, filled with the optimism of the late 60s, yet they also attracted a steady stream of strangers and hangers-on. It was the era of free love, open doors, and trust. But in hindsight, it left the home vulnerable. Neighbors noticed unfamiliar faces coming and going, and even friends admitted that not everyone who showed up at the Polanski house was trustworthy. Some were part of the shifting cultural scene, others linked to drugs, and still others who simply wandered in because the atmosphere was so welcoming. What Sharon didn't know was that the house had already caught the attention of one of the darkest figures of the era, Charles Manson. Months before, Manson had ties to music producer Terry Melcher, who once lived at Cielo Drive. When Melcher moved out, Sharon and Roman moved in, but Manson, bitter over his failed music ambitions, still associated the property with betrayal. Rumors suggest that even though Manson knew Melcher no longer lived there, the house remained a symbol of everything he believed had rejected him. In his warped mind, it represented Hollywood, power, and the establishment that had shut the door on his dreams. For Sharon, unaware of the danger, Cielo Drive was just home. She spent the final weeks of her pregnancy decorating, preparing and welcoming friends to keep her company while Roman worked overseas. The house was alive with activity, but shadows lingered at the edges. Friends would later recall that Sharon seemed both glowing and restless, happy to be on the verge of motherhood but unsettled by the absence of her husband and the eerie feeling that surrounded the house at night. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just nerves, but as the summer reached its peak, the unease that hung over Cielo Drive was impossible to ignore. What Sharon couldn't have imagined was that her dream home, the place she believed would be the beginning of her new life as a wife and mother, was about to become the scene of one of the most infamous crimes in American history. August 8, 1969, was supposed to be an ordinary summer night at Cielo Drive. Sharon Tate, now 8.5 months pregnant, was hosting a small group of friends while Roman Polanski worked overseas in London. That evening, her companions included hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Folger's boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski. The four of them gathered inside the warm glow of Sharon's hillside home, talking, eating, and enjoying the quiet of a Friday night in Los Angeles. To anyone passing by, it looked like a peaceful evening at one of Hollywood's most glamorous addresses. But by the time the night ended, the world would be forever changed. Unbeknownst to Sharon and her friends, a group of Charles Manson's followers had been sent to Cielo Drive with orders to cause chaos. Manson himself had been rejected by the Hollywood music world and was determined to send a violent message. The house was chosen not because of Sharon, but because of its connection to record producer Terry Melcher, who had once lived there. Sharon and her friends were strangers to the killers, but tragically, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the early hours of August 9th, the group broke into the home, and what unfolded was nothing short of horrific. The details of that night remain among the darkest in Hollywood history. Sharon begged for the life of her unborn child, pleading with the intruders to spare her, but her cries went unanswered. Jay Sebring tried to protect her, and Abigail Folger and Wojciech Frykowski fought desperately to escape, but one by one they were overcome. The attackers left behind scenes so brutal that even veteran police officers were shaken. Messages scrawled in blood on the walls turned the case into an instant media frenzy. Newspapers the next morning carried headlines that stunned the nation. A young star, murdered in her own home with no clear motive. The crime didn't just feel like another tragedy. It felt like the end of Hollywood's innocence. The shockwaves spread instantly. Neighbors in the Hollywood Hills panicked, fearing they could be next. Stars like Steve McQueen and Mia Farrow reportedly changed their daily routines, installing new security measures and avoiding social gatherings. For the first time, Hollywood's elite, who had lived so freely in the spirit of the 1960s, felt exposed and vulnerable. The very idea that someone could enter a home like Sharon's, in such a safe and exclusive neighborhood, shattered the illusion of protection that fame and fortune were supposed to provide. For Sharon's family, the news was devastating beyond comprehension. Her parents had been preparing to welcome their first grandchild. Instead, they were faced with an unimaginable loss. Roman Polanski, thousands of miles away, received the call that his wife, his unborn child, and their friends had been brutally taken. The photographs of him returning to Los Angeles, broken and hollow-eyed, captured the grief of a man whose world had collapsed overnight. The murders weren't just a crime. They became a cultural turning point, a grim marker of the end of the 1960s. And as investigators scrambled to uncover who could have committed such an atrocity, rumors swirled wildly. Some speculated about drug connections, others about occult involvement, and still others whispered about Hollywood's darker secrets. It would take months before the truth came into focus, and when it did, the names behind the horror, the so-called Manson family, would terrify the world. In the days following the murders, Los Angeles was gripped by fear and confusion. Police struggled to piece together what had happened at Cielo Drive, and in the absence of answers, speculation ran wild. The press fueled sensational theories, drugs, cults, even secret Hollywood feuds. For months, the case remained unsolved, leaving an entire city on edge. Stars who once flaunted open houses and public parties began fortifying their homes with alarms and gates. The murders of Sharon Tate and her friends didn't just feel like a crime. They felt like a signal that no one, not even the elite of Hollywood, was safe. The breakthrough came later that year when police connected the brutal killings at Cielo Drive with another horrific crime scene at the LaBianca residence. The common thread was the so-called Manson family, a group of young followers led by the manipulative Charles Manson. When the connection was finally made public, the shock deepened. These weren't professional hitmen or rival gangsters. These were disaffected youths, some from privileged backgrounds, who had fallen under Manson's hypnotic control. The idea that ordinary young people could be transformed into cold-blooded killers was chilling, and it haunted the cultural imagination for decades to come. The trial that followed became one of the most sensational spectacles in American legal history. In 1970, Manson and several of his followers were charged with the murders. Their behavior in court only heightened the horror. They laughed, sang, and taunted the proceedings, painting strange symbols on their foreheads and showing no remorse for what had been done. For the Tate family, sitting through the trial was agonizing. Sharon's mother, Doris Tate, listened as details of her daughter's final hours were recounted, and photographs from the crime scene were displayed as evidence. It was more than any family should ever have to endure, but Doris refused to look away. She was determined that Sharon's story would not be reduced to a footnote in a criminal trial. When guilty verdicts were finally handed down in 1971, the nation exhaled. Manson and his followers were sentenced to death, though the sentences were later commuted to life in prison after California abolished the death penalty. Even so, the Tate family's struggle was far from over. For decades, parole hearings for the Manson killers kept reopening wounds. Doris Tate became a tireless advocate for victims' rights, attending every hearing and ensuring that the voices of the victims' families were heard. She helped pioneer legislation that allowed families to speak directly at parole hearings, a practice that continues today. Her activism turned unimaginable personal loss into a legacy of protection for others. Hollywood, too, would never be the same. Security at celebrity homes tightened, the carefree lifestyle of the 1960s faded, and the murders became a grim bookend to an era often remembered for peace and love. To many, the Tate murders symbolized the death of the summer of love, marking the moment when innocence gave way to paranoia. Even now, over half a century later, the names Manson and Tate remain inseparably linked in history, a reminder of how quickly fame and beauty can be consumed by violence. For many years, Sharon Tate's name was spoken almost exclusively in connection with the night she lost her life. Newspapers, documentaries, and even casual conversations often reduced her to a victim, overshadowing the vibrant woman and rising star she truly was. But as decades passed, her family, friends, and admirers worked to reclaim her legacy, reminding the world that Sharon was far more than a headline. Slowly, the conversation around Sharon Tate shifted from tragedy to remembrance, from victimhood to legacy. Her films, once overshadowed by the infamous events of 1969, began to find renewed attention. Valley of the Dolls, though mocked at its release, developed a cult following, with Sharon's role as Jennifer North praised as one of the most touching performances in the film. Other works, such as The Fearless Vampire Killers and Eye of the Devil, were revisited, giving new audiences the chance to see her range and screen presence. Critics who once dismissed her as just another pretty blonde began to acknowledge the promise she carried, a promise that Hollywood never gave her the chance to fully realize. Sharon's family, especially her mother Doris and her sisters Patty and Deborah, fought tirelessly to preserve her memory. Doris not only became a leading voice in victims' rights, but also pushed for Sharon to be remembered as a woman of kindness, humor, and strength. Deborah Tate later continued that mission, speaking out against exploitative depictions of Sharon and ensuring her story was told with dignity. For the Tate family, it was never about erasing the tragedy. It was about making sure it didn't define Sharon's entire life. In popular culture, Sharon's image began to resurface as both a symbol of 1960s glamour and a reminder of the fragility of fame. Her photos, sun-kissed, smiling, often candid, appeared in retrospectives of Hollywood's golden era. Designers cited her style as timeless. The long blonde hair, the simple yet elegant dresses, the effortless way she carried herself. She became an icon of an era, not because of the crime that took her, but because of the beauty and light she radiated during her short life. In recent years, Sharon has been reintroduced to a new generation through film and media. Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood portrayed her not as a victim, but as a living, breathing presence. A joyful actress enjoying her career, her friends, and the thrill of being young in Hollywood. Margot Robbie's performance as Sharon gave audiences a glimpse of what had been lost, a woman full of warmth and potential. For many, it was the first time Sharon Tate was seen not just as part of a tragedy, but as a person with her own story. Of course, speculation and conspiracy theories still linger online, with some claiming hidden motives or mysterious connections behind the events of 1969. But those closest to Sharon reject sensationalism, urging people to remember her for who she was. As Deborah Tate once said, "Sharon was the sweetest soul. She deserves to be remembered for her life, not her death." And that message has resonated. Today, Sharon Tate's story is no longer defined solely by violence. It is a story of resilience, remembrance, and the determination of those who loved her to ensure that she is remembered as more than a symbol of tragedy. Her legacy continues to evolve, proving that even a life cut short can leave an impact that stretches far beyond its years. Sharon Tate's story is one of beauty, promise, and heartbreak, an arc that began with a shy girl moving from town to town, blossomed into a Hollywood career full of potential, and ended in a way that stunned the world. For decades, her name was tied to one of the darkest crimes in American history, but as time has passed, her life has slowly been reclaimed from the shadows. Sharon was not just a victim of violence. She was a daughter who made her parents proud, a sister who inspired devotion, a wife who loved deeply, and a soon-to-be mother preparing for a new chapter. She was also an actress on the verge of stardom, with a presence that continues to shine through every frame she left behind. Her story reminds us of the fragility of fame and the unpredictability of life. She lived in an era where Hollywood was at its most glamorous, yet most vulnerable, and her loss marked the end of an age when the dream seemed untouchable. More than 50 years later, Sharon Tate's presence is still with us, in the photos that capture her smile, in the films that preserve her talent, and in the memories guarded by those who loved her. She endures as a symbol of what was lost, but also of what continues. Her life asks us to look beyond the headlines, beyond the crime, and to see the person who existed before it all. Sharon Tate was more than a victim. She was a light, and though that light was extinguished far too soon, its glow still lingers, reminding us that some stars, even when they fall, never truly fade.